Hello, welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube and you want to learn more about what we do here, you can visit us at officehours.global. Our first hour is typically questions around virtual events and media. And our second hour is something that we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're talking about company culture, the importance of company culture, whether small, nonprofit, or corporate organization. So you want to stay tuned. And for our producers, this is a great time for you to ask your questions and pop them into Makana. And if you want to learn more about what we're doing this week, head over to officehours.global. All right, Bill, let's go.
Absolutely. Our first question this morning comes from Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida. And he says, here at Mozilla, we use the Panopto platform with dual synced 1080p HLS live in the player for separate shared slides and or screen and speaker video. Are there any similar dual stream services? He asks. Thanks.
Alex?
Yeah, On24 has another solution that looks a lot like that. Most of the ones that we've done, we've just kind of hand rolled. So that basically we build two embedded players that are there, and then we're streaming them separately. And generally the sync isn't perfect, but I don't know if the Panoptic player is either. We haven't used that platform specifically, but again, what we've done is just built a page, to do that support directly.
Next question.
And Andy is right back with a second high-rated question this morning. He asks, does Zoom ISO offer dual monitor mode Zoom capture to NDI?
Alex?
I do believe it does. So I don't know that 100%, but I do believe that you can take, because I know that on this show we can get both your screen share as well as your video. So I believe that's definitely possible.
Next question.
Joaquin Mattis in Imperial Valley, California says, a show I work for has a FOH, a front of house board op that is very inexperienced and gives me bad aux outs just about every single show. Is there a reliable way to split the XLR out from a Shure receiver to avoid relying on him to build a separate bus for me?
Jason?
Well, the easiest way, my Shure receiver, the PSM 300, has throughput, so you can plug in and then plug directly out. I don't know if that's necessarily going to prevent this from reoccurring, but look on the back. I bet you could plug through it.
Bill?
There's also another feature on many mixing boards, and this is hard to diagnose because you don't know what board they have, but there's a thing called channel inserts on most of the decent mixers. That channel insert will take the signal before it hits the channel strip and split it off so that you can tap it out. In every case where I've gotten a really good separate mix of a live show, I've used those channel outs to come out of the board into a separate recorder, and that will give you ISOs on every channel, more than two. But if you don't do it that early, if it's mixed before and you're just taking an aux out, you're usually at the board operator's whim. Sorry.
Alex?
Yeah, I believe that receiver is putting a line output from there. It may or may not be, but that either way, you can, as long as you don't need to power it, you can have a passive splitter like a Whirlwind Split 6. And so you can theoretically just push that out into that Whirlwind, and then you send them the input that they need. And it's just basically, it will split it into 6 signals. And so we usually have those in our packs, in our what we call our Crikey kit. There's usually one of those to split things out, and it's fairly quiet and just kind of moves the content where it needs to go, or moves the signal where it needs to go.
Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, I like the thought or the understanding about you could split it and have it as a separate thing, but the source of your issue is training and personnel, right? So I would spend time on that and just spend a little bit of resource to train that person up. But also, if you're able to split the signal into Dante, right, you can have it mixed separately in a DAW if you need to do that. That's what my House of Worship does. The only thing that you have to pay attention to in that point is the preamp, right? So whatever device it's coming into, you have one level to set, and then you could adjust volume separately from there.
And Mitchell?
Yeah, I agree with Noah. I think sitting down and training up the operator to let them know the proper way to do it would be time well spent. And if they have an attitude about that, then maybe it's time to look for another front of house engineer.
Yeah, training makes a good impact and valuable skill for them to learn. Alex?
Yeah, I think that the question is whether he has any impact on the front of house. It sounds like he may be actually doing a job. The front of house works for somebody else and just isn't isn't as focused as they could be on what he needs. And in those cases, we often quietly route around people Like, so if we don't have control, we had one in Paris one time where we basically had rerouted the entire signal, all the signals around the crew that was there, because we just didn't have confidence that they would give us what we needed.
Next question.
Jonas Ischer of Karlsruhe, Germany says, is there a way to remove the bottom round corners of the Zoom ISO NDI feed?
Alex?
I don't think we have those round corners. I mean, I think if we look at the signal that we're in right now, we're pulling. Yeah, we don't have the round corners that you're talking about. So I think that there might be something going on your end, because we're using Zoom ISO and we're not exhibiting that. So I don't know if it's a Zoom ISO issue. Oh, it might be. And we are using a straight Blackmagic video signal instead of NDI. But yeah, we'll take a look at that. I've never seen the rounded corner issue.
Next question.
David Paskin in Miami, Florida, and here on the panel says, from last week's show with Andy, is there a way to grab Zoom comments as an RSS feed for use externally?
David?
So just to offer some context, I was really inspired by the workshop last week with Andy using Google Sheets. And so I went out to create a poor man's Mukana, sort of, so I could bring in comments that are not perhaps native to whatever platform I'm using. And so here's what I did, right? I basically created a Google Sheet that has...
Hope we lost you.
David, yeah.
Oh,
David.
dear.
a questioner in
There we
here
go.
and the questions here, then they populate up here, and I formatted this, and then when I hit next question, it'll automatically move the next question up. The problem is populating this spreadsheet. Now, if I invite people to submit questions ahead of time, it works great. But what I'd love to do is be able to somehow grab the questions that people put in Zoom, maybe as an RSS feed, and have them automatically populate here. So that's the question.
Alex?
Yeah, I'm not sure if the API supports it yet, but I think that the goal is to make sure that all of those things are available. So I'm not sure if it's there yet, but I think that, as Andy had implied, it should be able to, if you can access that raw code. I mean, and it does appear that all of that stuff is available to Zoom, to Isadora. They're sending it out right now. There shouldn't be any reason why it couldn't be packaged into an RSS feed, because that's simply updating a text file. So definitely should be possible. Of course, if you knew somebody that was connected to Makana, you could probably have Makana too. So anyway, you should probably ping them. Anyway, all right. Sorry, go ahead.
And just jumping back to the previous question for Jonas, Jeffrey says that you can turn off rounded corners in Zoom. So that if you want to check that out, that would be helpful. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas says, the Rolling Truck Stones thing, aka the Rolling Stones Mobile Studio, was a studio that earned its place in history in the lyrics to Smoke on the Water, the famous song. Have any others?
John?
Mr. Brady sent me this answer in Discord. He said the Who Quadrophenia in 1973, Ronnie Lane's Mobile, also known as LMS, was parked southwest London for much of the recording of Quadrophenia.
There's our trivia for the day. Next question.
Or Noah Sargent comes up next from Fullerton, California. B&H, the famous store in New York City, has the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO on its Deal Zone page for just $995 US, $300 off. Does this signal clearing inventory for new products, or is it just a one-off sale?
Tom?
Wow, how to predict the future. I think you need a Ouija board to do that. However, this is not the first retailer to discount the ATEM Mini Extreme. There was a UK retailer, and a number of our people in After Hours jumped on that. It was running about $800-900 to get it here to the US. But to follow with B&H makes you wonder what's happening.
Definitely. Mitchell? You're on mute. Alex?
They may be doing it
okay.
for a multitude of reasons that we don't even know about, and that is entirely up to them to move product for whatever reason. But I wouldn't read too much into it, because if they were anticipating moving inventory in anticipation for making something else available, then it would have been done probably around NAB time. So that's my guess on it.
That's a good hypothesis there. Alex?
Yeah, I think that a lot of this has to do with just managing supply chain. Like what you have in inventory versus what's output. And again, a lot of these are deals that are made with B&H. To make sure that they get to have these opportunities. And a lot of times this is done with different retailers there. So I wouldn't read too much into it. I don't think that I don't think that the extreme is too long in the tooth yet, given other things that are probably on Blackmagic's release schedule, that we assume somewhere in the future, there's still a 4K solution to the HD switchers that we saw. Feels like that would happen before they would go back, because I think that these products are, I don't know, how much they would add to them that would be significant, to make that work. So it may just be just a seasonal deal.
We'll see. Next question.
David Paskin's up next from Miami. Oh, I'm sorry, Liberty White from Atlanta, Georgia. I must have been out of order here. I recently opened Notability on my iPad and noticed that the mirroring icon is gone. For those using Notability for telestration, how do you make that happen?
Jason.
Liberty, I'm curious, was there a screen mirroring icon in the app, or are you talking about the one in iOS? Are they both gone?
The one in the actual app was like, all I would have to do is click and there's telestration, and I haven't used it for a month or so, and now it is gone. So I was just curious if anyone who's using Notability or one of the Notability for that, if they saw it. So yes, it's only in the app that it's gone.
My guess is that it has to do with the fact that now in iPad OS, all of the screen mirroring can be done completely system wide, and it's probably easier to do it that way. Does it work at all if you try to do it like just by swiping down from the top?
Oh, that's a good question. I turned off my iPad now, but I will try that and I will report back, because that's a really good point. I wasn't sure if possibly, I know that Notability has gone to a subscription model. So I was wondering, did they take that feature out of I paid for it because you've got to pay for that, but is that now part of the Plus? So I'm not sure. And I was curious.
Be sure to restore the purchase. If you've paid for it, restore the purchase. They almost always, if they go to subscription model, they will almost always grandfather you in if you put your money in early, so to speak.
Right. Hoping so. So we'll see. Next question.
David Paskin in Miami, Florida, up next with thoughts on the new whiteboard in Zoom.
Alex?
And David, can you let us know what's new in the whiteboard? I thought there has been a whiteboard for a while, right? Have they updated it?
Yeah, they updated it, so now it's a persistent whiteboard. So so this is, for example, this is a whiteboard that I used for a recent program that I did, and it's a nicer interface. First of all, it doesn't live in screen share. It's just on the bottom of your Zoom control panel. So I put an image in here, and then I had participants be able to put stickies in wherever they wanted. And then once I share, so it's automatically shared with everybody in the meeting temporarily, and then you can permanently share it with them so that they can access it if you just go into Zoom. Well, that's where I was actually, sorry. I'm actually looking at it in the Zoom, on the Zoom website, not in a meeting. So I can access it both in the meeting and out of the meeting. And there are some it's just a nicer interface, I think.
It's interesting. It looks a lot like Miro, the Miro kind of with the little notepads and so on and so forth, but in Zoom.
John?
So obviously it's an attempt at them to provide some sort of asynchronous communication into Zoom, because a lot of us use Zoom and Discord or Zoom and Slack and Drive. And so they've got to add these type of asynchronous communications into the product to be competitive with Teams.
Thanks for bringing that up, David, because I saw the update too, haven't done it yet, but to John's point, it's like, especially for educators, for presenters, and just making the overall experience much more seamless. So now I have an opportunity to try that out. Alex?
Yeah, I in the past, I work with a company about doing software development to build apps for a variety of things. And we spend hours in Miro, like just putting out, these are the most important things and building these rows of exactly how this whole thing's going to be developed and how it's going to get put together. So, in a planning session, it'd be good for us to experiment with maybe some of the planning for NAMM and Cinegear and WWDC. It could be an interesting thing for us to have a session and use these to, maybe we'll experiment with that on Thursday to talk about a little bit of it. If Noah approves of this idea, we might go down that path.
We won't put you on the spot, Noah, but it would be a great interactive experience.
Liberty brings down the hammer. She's like, no pressure, but pressure.
Right. And for our producers, this is a great opportunity for you to add questions, whether it be for the first hour, for the second hour, as we continue to get into it. Next question.
David Paskin in Miami is up next again. And he says, like Alex, I bring my phone in as a camera using the Apple TV connected to an ATEM. Wondering if there's a shortcut that can open the app and, most importantly, AirPlay my phone to the Apple TV.
Bill?
So often you find things that you wish you could do in a sequence, and there are a couple of tools that I would explore. I can't tell you you're going to be able to do this because all the tools that I've used have things that they can do and things that they can't do. I would look at Automator first to see if there's a possibility that thing, which has been around the Mac environment for forever, has those hooks. It's a drag and drop automate sequence on your operating system tool that sometimes can do these things really well. If not, that's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head that can launch separated programs and create layouts of them on your machine and invoke things. That would be where I would look first.
David?
The challenge is actually not on the Mac side. I think it's on the iPhone side. What I need to do is I open the app, I use Shoot, and then I need to flick down and choose screen mirroring and choose Apple TV, and it's a pain in the tuchus. And what I really like to do is press one shortcut on my iPhone and just have it go right to my Apple TV.
Jason?
Yeah.
Oh.
I was just going to say, I don't know of anything in Shortcuts that does that, and I've only played with Shortcuts a tiny bit.
So if you allow Shortcuts to do scripting, there's no reason that this can't be done with Shortcuts, but there is an additional layer just for safety that you have to turn off in order to allow it to do this kind of major system-wide, output. But there is nothing pre-made in the Shortcuts app, to answer your question.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Mike Beardmore in Reading in the UK, and he says, did anyone watch Eurovision on Saturday and have any comments on the production?
Go ahead, Alex.
I did watch a little of it, and I wonder. I just wonder whether it's a European thing versus an American thing, in that it seems very over the top, but at the same time, I just couldn't find myself watching it for very long. I watched it for a little while, and I was like, wow, that's a lot of things, and I think that I thought about it a lot after watching, and I only watched a couple minutes of it. So to be fair, I just watched it for a little while, and then it was like, this isn't really my thing. But I realized that we've been doing a lot of shows we've been doing a lot of concerts. And I think that the thing that I'm most drawn to, and maybe it's the fact that I'm doing concerts many of them are very intimate, where people are singing to the camera, the way we've had people on our show here sing to the camera and everything else. And it's smaller, and it has nice lighting and so on and so forth, but it doesn't get over the top. And I think that I found with Eurovision, oftentimes I'm kind of watching a live music video, and I don't find any intimacy there. And obviously that's not what they're there for. And so they're doing what they need to do. But I wonder whether it's, and it's a huge thing. I know that, we used to work at my old office in Washington, D.C. was in the same floor as Eurovision, the company, what they call EBU, the European Broadcasting Union, which was, but Eurovision is a part of that. And so we got to see a lot of it, going through. And I just found it to be a layer of artificialness that I had a hard time wanting to watch for very long. And I think it's a challenge for concerts on air in general, is that, I think what draws us to the MTV Unplugged, to the, the individual singing or whatever, is the authenticity of it that I that I have a hard time getting over with Eurovision.
And just super quick, if you want to share what Eurovision is, I know it as the broadcast company, but now I'm looking in the comments and I see Mickey had said it's a Eurovision thing. So they're just, and Dennis said it, they're just over the top overall. What is Eurovision?
Oh, Eurovision is a huge competition across Europe that is a giant music performance extravaganza, I think is all you can say about it. It is, they push the outer envelope of how to, it's one of the biggest productions in Europe, and they push the outer envelope of production, live production, out to almost unimaginable levels. The effects, the choreograph, the edit, everything is all very, very tightly wound. And so it is it really is probably one of the heaviest, most complex live events every year. And then of course, and a country this year, maybe predictably, Ukraine won, I believe. And but normally it's again it's a thing where these different artists basically move up through the ranks, and it's the kind of the Super Bowl of for American Super Bowl of this, but or March Madness or something, because it only comes down to one person as opposed to a big team. But anyway, it's a crazy thing to see. I would highly recommend checking it out or looking for it on YouTube just to see the level of over the top. This is an understatement of what it does. But it had me philosophically thinking a lot about the what has me want to watch music on TV. And I think that what I really want is authenticity and connection, and that might be just me, but I feel like that's what I find moving, and I had a harder time watching that.
Yeah, and you're correct. Ukraine did win, and I'll pop the link in Mukana for anyone who has not seen Eurovision. Next question.
Next question comes from David Brady in New York City, and David says, using Companion to trigger multiple actions. For example, open.key file leads to play file leads to start from the first slide. Is hit or miss? Timers don't work. Is there a way to have these actions happen conditionally?
Mitchell?
I'm sorry I can't tell you exactly how to do it, David, but I can speculate on why it's not doing it. Is that, for example, I'm using the MixFX Pro version. It requires a beta version of Companion just to get that far, and it is not getting feedback from the application. That's coming next. So I suspect it's a complicated affair to make that work.
Next question.
Jonas Nuttall is happy today in Stuttgart, Germany. He says, my NAB Blackmagic Design Hall has just arrived. A new ATEM, a new HyperDeck Cloud Store. What excites you most about this new gear?
Alex?
I'm pretty excited over time to start experimenting with the Cloud Store. I think that the other parts are great too, but I think that the Cloud Store is something that is when I saw it at first, I was like, really, are they going into that? But as I watched through the presentation, I was like, oh, this could be really useful for some of our larger programs. And so I think that one, I think it's probably going to be some sharp edges as we get started, and we're going to learn how to do it. But I think that especially for an organization like ours, I think it's a pretty powerful system.
John?
What I'm excited about is, Jonas, you got it, and you can test it, and you can show us how to use it in the second hour. That's what I'm excited.
There'll be a report due next week.
I was thinking, I'm excited for you, Jonas. So yes, after hours, just ping the channel so that we know when you're on.
I think there's a whole second hour here, Jonas. It's waiting for you. You just ping me, and we'll find a space.
Just give us the word.
Yep.
Mitchell?
It's scaring me with cable management because I've already got a stack of cables on here for the Extreme. Now I'm adding the shuttle, and the shuttle has a lot of gazentas and gazaltas on it, as you may be able to see there. I'm building all the cables for it. That's what's taking me so long, and I'm going to hook it up today. But what I like about it, if the shuttle fits right next to the Extreme as if it's an extension of it, it's a device that has heft to it. They obviously weighted it. The shuttle knob on it has a good feel to it, very much like our old-fashioned shuttle on editing systems. I'm very happy with what they're doing. ATEM-wise, I'm on my radar screen, the 2ME, because I'd like to get all these wires off my desktop. I'd rather have it in the rack with just a single cable going to a controller.
Jason?
I love having the idea of playback controls back on my desk. I have a fair number of hyperdecks, but there's something that they didn't mention. I did this during the countdown, but there's a click in the button that I don't think Grant made any mention of, and I like the idea of being able to select things in a way that I can feel like the proprioception is useful to me, especially when I'm looking at a camera and trying to trigger something.
Mitchell?
Yeah, the neat thing about the click that Jason just mentioned is it's like my old Betacam deck, which is still sitting in my rack behind me, is that you need to get between jog and shuttle and some of those old functionalities. So they do it the way we've learned to do it.
And Bill?
Mitchell's demo just triggered something. I mean, I can't believe retailers aren't offering, along with their products, a cable pack that has one each in short, medium, and long, and you can pick the one you like, that just gives you all the cables with the thing. There's a sales opportunity here. Somebody is deeply missing, because I can't tell you the number of times I've had to go out to the storeroom and try to find that one last cable to hook up the last part of a device.
And Alex?
I think the part for me with cables is usually they just never give me what I need. I have a whole stack of cables that come with products, and then I just hang them up somewhere because they're not fast enough. They're not this, they're not that, they're not the right length, they're not whatever. And so, I'm always surprised. It's great when they send them to me, but because they're not the highest performance, usually because they're trying to save money, I usually just end up as kind of like little extras that eventually find their way into a pile and then eventually get given to somebody else or recycled. So I think that there's a good reason not to put those cables in.
Not to force it on people, right?
Yeah.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, challenging products and challenging budgets. How have you made the former work with the latter?
Good one, Douglas. Alex?
So usually if we see something that we care about that is challenge, so if it's just a job, then I don't really give a lot of discounts. so it's, if I don't see some upside, it's just kind of like, well, this is the price that it's going to cost to do the thing. But most of the time when we have something come in that we're really excited about, a lot of times we try to figure out a way to get scrappy. How do we get something out of it? How do we get something else that is going to be worth something to us? So sometimes that is, we would like promotional, we would like to be able to use, because a lot of the work I do, I can't talk about. And so we go, well, we're going to do this for you. But what we want is, to be able to use the footage for behind the scenes, or to be able to use it for training, or to be able to promote that we did it. So those are the kind of things that I try to think through. We also lower people's expectations. Like, hey, this is not, we're not doing this at the full rate. And, and in writing, we make sure that they're clear that these are the things that can go sideways when we do that. And so those are some of the things that we've made work when we don't have the budgets that we felt like we should to do that kind of job.
Noah?
Yeah, there's something to be said about other value besides money, like Alex is talking about, whether that is, experience or advertisement or, trading for another value or for stock even. Like, it just depends on the project. For me, I realized that the lower budget clients that I had didn't respect the projects the same way. And so I quickly found a way to price myself out of those situations a lot of the time. But there's just people who don't care about really the product and about you, like, tend to be the lower tier people or projects or what have you. So I would try to find a way to get better, self improvements, get your skill set up and try to level up in that sense, so that you're not doing these low level projects that frankly can be a waste of your time and energy. And you'll also see the other side of that is like the OH community is innovating and pioneering this new system, right? And the hopes of that is that that will trickle into paid projects and other projects, even if it's not necessarily the format that we're currently in. So there's lots of opportunity there to grow and to expand for sure.
Yeah, and even in just saying the lower paying ones, there's a difference between lower paying just because they really do not have the resources, and lower paying because they do not value to what Noah said there. Mitchell?
It's all good advice coming to you, and I think it makes a lot of sense. The toughest thing making an evaluation of these two conflicting, perhaps, subjects is that you need to be able to walk away. You have to be prepared to walk away from any job that comes in, and don't become enamored by the client you might be working for, or the complexity of the project, or breaking new ground, because it can really sink you very quickly. And a lot of jobs nowadays are working very close, even with a 10% contingency fund. So be careful. It's a good question, Douglas, but I have to be very circumspect when I make that decision.
Yeah, and it's almost like a tie-in of all the advice that has been shared. There's a project we were working on. It was a couple of years ago, and we'd worked with the client on a number of tasks or shoots, and they only had said budget. So instead of saying, "Well, no," which is a complete sentence, so it's okay to say no, we said, "Okay, we'll do this at this budget, but with the commitment to a year of work." So that goes back to the idea of them actually valuing you, and if it really is a budget constraint, to make it work for it should be mutually beneficial at the end of the day. So and it worked, and they signed off. They had no problem with that because they understand the value of what we brought to the table. It was for a fund, an investor fund company, and this was them doing their monthly report out. So they knew that the money would continue to come, obviously, but then for us, the value of adding that to our portfolio of work, but then also their commitment to another year of work with our team. Alex?
Yeah, and the other thing that we definitely get into pretty quickly is limiting their choices when we don't have the budget that we think we need. It's like we're going to kind of run how this show is going to go because we know where the expensive things are versus the inexpensive. A lot of times your clients won't know that. They won't know what part of it makes it expensive. And so they will just ask you to do like little expensive things. We used to laugh because there was this visual effects shot where they just had to have the camera in a certain position. And they just left this piece out that we're going to have to clean up later. And, people's arms go over it and everything else. It's not like we can just garbage mat it out. We were like, okay, I just need to make sure you're clear before we start shooting that that's a $4,000 decision. like I just, like you might save money here, but that's going to cost $4,000 for me to fix that. And then they said, well, why don't we move the camera over? But they were absolutely certain. We tried to gently do it until we had to bring out the price of it. And so, don't be afraid to say, well, we have a limit. The big limit is, I'm going to be able to do this for you at a cost-effective way to do this, but I am everything that you ask for after this will cost money. Like you just have to understand that there's no place for me to steal from, somewhere else in the budget to do this. And so, just being straight up with folks. And again, sometimes they don't have the money. A lot of times they have the money. They just have chosen not to spend it in this area. And I will say the place that you see this a lot is nonprofits. We're a nonprofit. And the hard part there is that nonprofits can be the hardest to work with when it comes to doing these things. Just, and so because they'll talk to you about the cause and all the other things that and why it's important. And I get that, and I think that is important too. But you also have to, if you're a for-profit working for a nonprofit, it gets complicated. Nonprofits working for nonprofits is a little simpler in some ways.
Next question.
Next one comes from Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware. Here on the panel, what hub has the maximum number of Thunderbolt ports available?
Jason?
I've yet to see anything more than, if you're talking about the Thunderbolt 4 hub protocol, I've yet to see any more than 3 coming out of a single port. And I don't know if that's a hard limitation or if nobody's tried it, but I've yet to see any more than 3.
Tom?
Yeah, I've just seen the 3, and I like this one from OWC. I'm using it right now today. And $179, it seems pretty reasonable.
And Mitchell?
Yeah, I've got the other OWC that's labeled Thunderbolt Dock. I think that you have that graphic, or at least it was put up by Jason. It's got 3 outputs and 1 input, so that I count that as 3. And I'm just curious why that is, because I've maybe seen on Amazon things that have like 5 or 6 Thunderbolt outputs, and I'm wondering, wow, wouldn't that be cool? But as it is now, you kind of have to use the second port on the M1 Mac Mini to get another hub. So you got 2 hubs that you're juggling as far as outputs go. So it's just getting kind of messy.
And Alex?
Yeah, remember that there is still a limited bandwidth. So the ones that have more than that, I think, are not Thunderbolt. I think they're USB-Cs. I don't believe that I think they may have 5 or 6 of them USB-Cs, but again, they're all sharing a pipeline. And so as you stack those up, you end up with 2 problems. One is bandwidth. Things start to not have enough bandwidth to support what they're doing. The other is stability. So if you have a lot of things on a hub, you have to understand that hub is sharing that. And things that are very chatty, we've noticed that we have problems with video. Like, for instance, when I'm doing my Mini Extreme or something else like that, I want that to plug directly into the computer. I'm not going to hub, because we'll have increased stability issues for both audio and video going through hubs.
Next question.
Eric Nathan in Bellingham, Washington is up next. He says, do any of the panelists use OBS in conjunction with the ATEM Mini? And if so, what does that workflow look like?
Go ahead, David.
I don't use OBS, but I use Ecamm. And I hope I'm correct in saying that all of these software switching programs will essentially function. The workflow will look the same with an ATEM. Basically, you plug your cameras into your ATEM, run that into your computer, and then that is seen as a webcam, essentially, that can be brought into OBS or Ecamm or vMix or any of these others. The key piece to remember is that no matter how many cameras, whether you're using the plain old ATEM or the Extreme, it only shows up as one camera feed in your computer for your switching software. So if you need to have multiple cameras from your ATEM on screen at any time, that won't happen natively in your switching software. So I use my ATEM with multiple cameras, and then to bring in, a screen share or something like that, I use a Camlink to bring, so I can have multiple cameras on the same time.
I've only used the ATEM and OBS once. And if you've heard any of our conversations on Office Hours about OBS, there are pros and cons. The workflow was a laptop, because we were sharing out a presentation into Zoom. So it was laptop into the ATEM Mini Pro into Zoom. And there was a lot of lag. And then just even the audio syncing was not on point. Now that's not necessarily OBS, but just sharing what happened from that one experience. So that was our workflow. Alex?
Yeah, I think that you want to make sure that the OBS, the system that OBS is on, is going to be a PC with enough horsepower to handle it. I know some people that are successful with a Mac. I just don't know very many. We end up with lots of sync issues. That is, the sync issues break up all kinds of other things in OBS on the Mac. So I would be, concerned, in that area as far as connecting those. The sample rate of the number of people using OBS on the PC is much higher, and so you end up with it's a more stable product, but it still has a tendency, and this happens with almost all software based ones. In fact, I think we've had it with TriCaster. Is when the system gets overloaded, when the CPUs get overloaded, the first thing that happens is your sync starts to fall out. So it is a perennial problem with any software-based switching system that has embedded audio.
Next question.
Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California says the Shure ULX D4Q is a one rack unit with 4 wireless receivers. Do you see the industry moving to condensing rack space? And how long do you think this type of tech moves to their more affordable product lines? Alex?
I definitely see that. I mean, density makes a big difference, and so we've seen this. I have not seen a 4-in-1U, but we've used 2s for a long time. And so it's great that they've gone to 4. I don't see that happening in the prosumer space or the less affordable rates, because the density actually is expensive to produce, and so it's not something that when people go into a lower cost receiver, a lot of times they're kind of just setting it somewhere. They're not in a rack environment. So the people who are putting it into a rack environment tend to be kind of leaning towards that. The one thing that has become a lot more affordable, which is still more expensive than this, but a lot less than it used to be, is the Axient products. So the Shure Axient products are kind of the gold standard for transmission, and those have dropped over half because of their new platform costs. So they're also something they're still, I think, more expensive than the ULX, but they are an incredible value now compared to, it used to be that, I don't remember what it was per channel, but it was a lot. And it's dropped, I think, at least in half since they moved to the new platform.
Next question.
Seven Scroll in Brooklyn, New York. Hi, guys. Says, morning. Using a Stream Deck and Companion to route different signals from our Blackmagic Video Hub to our HDMI projector, we notice flicker between different signals. Is there any way to get around that?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, it's funny. I always seem to have problems with projectors when I go to a place, and it seems that I always solve the problem with a decimator. I don't think it's the ATEM that's causing the problem. I think it's that the projector wants a very specific frame rate, and you may be in the wrong frame rate to make it happy. It might be an older one. It's always some kind of thing with old projectors.
Bill?
And I'll add to that check your power as well. I have run across a couple of circumstances, one with a camera and one with just a fluorescent light, where turning on a power hungry device like a fan or something like that would actually cause the lights to flicker because the power was somehow getting unstable. So just make sure that your power feeds on everything are locked on and solid before you assume you know what's happening.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, for virtual reality or augmented reality development, would a Mac Studio be usable, or would a dual system PC Mac setup, Mac for audio, PC for Unreal Engine and or Unity, a la Nick Justison's system, be best? Mobile and VR, AR are two of my focus areas.
Alex?
Yeah, I think it depends on what you're developing for. So if you're developing for Unreal, I would try to keep as much of it on a PC as possible. I have little less experience with Unity as far as that goes in recent years. But otherwise, the other thing to look at is when we watch WWDC to see what kind of focus Apple has on AR, VR, and whether every year it seems that they roll out a little bit more. So obviously, if you're developing for the Apple platform and some of the AR and VR opportunities that seem to be rolling out there, then obviously I would stick with the Mac and not worry about the PC side of things.
Next question.
Jeffrey Powers in Madison, Wisconsin is up next. Going through old videos from 10 plus years ago I kept for B-roll usage. The resolution and or quality is not to today's standard. Would you purge this old content or try to keep it?
Go ahead, Noah.
This is a great question. I think ultimately for me, I would recommend transcoding after color correction, right? So depending on the codec that you originally have it in, Jeffrey, you might have a more efficient H.265 codec or something for long-term storage. I mean, there's LTO and other methods like that too if you absolutely need to keep the footage. I manage 130 terabytes or so, and every couple of years I need to do the same thing of like look back at old projects, condense stuff, and maybe you just need the final edit of stuff. You don't need every single shot, and like you're saying, if it's essentially useless, most things in life, I should say, have a shelf life, right? And whether it's that B-roll footage or other things, it's going to come to the end of its life.
What? You don't need every shot? Just joking. Tom?
Well, when you're talking about B-roll footage and other things like that, I say save it all, because you have better tools nowadays than you did 2 years ago. You can make it look better, and you never know when you need a piece of history.
Right. Mitchell?
Yeah, I'll give you a piece of advice, Jeffrey, that always served me well. You won't need it until you throw it out.
Very true. Bill?
I'm just going to suggest, if you're thinking about doing it, do it now. Every single day we lose more capacity to get solid content off of those old formats into new stuff. I shot a project long ago with a reggae musician in the Phoenix, Tempe area, and we shot multicam. It was one of my first kind of self-put out multicam. I kept thinking, I'm going to go back and I'm going to remix that, because it was such a fabulous experience working in a live music thing, and we had 5 cameras, and it was just great. And I went to look at some of the old, those was, I think, high 8 tape back at the time, and it was almost, I could tell that it was just dying on the tapes. So don't hold off. Every week that goes by now, it's getting harder and harder to recover some of that old material.
Tim in the chat, Tim McCullough says, archive. It's cheap to be a digital pack rat. Next question.
Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California. Would you expect to see, what would you expect to see in Apple Glass when they make any sort of VR glasses?
David?
I don't know if I expect this, but I hope that it has some of the capacity that Google showed off at I/O last week. I was really impressed with the demonstration of being able to have real-time translation show up so that we could have better communication. That was really inspiring.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that my guess is that it'll probably be VR before AR. AR is hard. Like true AR, I think is hard. I think that a lot of us believe that the minimal viable product is somewhere between 6 and 8 K per eye, and well over 60 frames a second, potentially 120 frames a second. So I think that Apple has to be thinking in that direction. I don't know if they are, but it feels like that they have to think through that process. So I think that in a perfect world, we would see 120 frame per second 8K that would probably require 1 or 2 M1 chips. It might be an M1 chip per eye to be able to process that kind of data. So it'd be quite a pair of glasses to make that work. I think that we'll see. I mean, so far Apple has really spent a lot of time using these things to augment other experiences, not trying to become something you're spending hours and hours and hours in, but something that you can easily throw on and experience something extra in. So I'll be really interested to see how they position it, because I think that there are, really interesting opportunities to watch things and then have extra things added onto it. And I think that'll be interesting. But I think that the AR stuff, I think will probably a little further down the road. I could be wrong. But I think that it also, if it does do AR, it'll be a camera feeding back into your eyes. I don't think that it's going to be a clear glass, kind of solution. Again, I think that's probably a couple more years out.
And John?
Can't wait to see it. If anybody can make AR, VR goggles cool or glasses cool, it's going to be Apple.
Well said. Next question.
Scott Goff in Jackson, Tennessee is up next. He says, how much time each month do you dedicate to moonshot projects, and does it benefit your day-to-day work?
Noah?
I love this question. I think it's a great idea to have big ideas and big goals. I don't necessarily allocate a specific amount of time, even though that's probably a good idea to say I'm going to give myself a certain number of hours or time towards that. But for me, if I keep my goals in mind, it reminds me of what I'm working towards, right? And it allows me to work harder. And so that's some of the self-help world. They talk about setting goals and writing them down and coming back to them every day and thinking on them and journaling with them. So that's super helpful. I think progress should be the measurement of success, not necessarily hitting a certain metric or threshold. So you just ask yourself every day, am I moving closer to those goals?
Alex?
Yeah, I spend about 80% of my time on moonshot projects because that's my business. So that's what I do is moonshot projects. And which I find, I've, done for a long time. I think that the key to being able to get to do moonshot projects is to succeed in enough of it to make it, continue to be worth it. Confidence is everything with your clients and partners. And so, again, I've said this before, but I approach moonshot projects very conservatively. So I go, okay, what makes you really have to distill what is going to move this forward, and then as conservatively as possible, move that forward. The mistake people make is trying to create too many moonshot things all at one time. I'm going to do this crazy new thing and this crazy new thing and this crazy new thing. I try to keep it to 1 or 2 crazy things per project. And then everything else is as conservative as I can possibly make it, so that it's not something I'm thinking about while I'm thinking about the main thing.
Mitchell?
It's very rare that I get offered a moonshot project, so I have to make my own. And what we do to sort of satisfy that need is we try to pick out one good cause or nonprofit a year and put as much effort into that as we can. And I can't break it down by the hour every month. It's just as catch can, as the word goes. So we get satisfaction from that a lot of ways, and sometimes we get business from it. But it allows us, because we're technically the client, to apply whatever magic we want to that we don't normally get to use.
And David?
In the realm of this kind of work that you all do, I'm a complete doofus. So everything that I do is a moonshot, and I love being challenged every single day.
And you keep landing it each time. We're all in good company. Next question.
Next one is actually one of mine. I put this in. I saw part of the Billboard Music Awards last night and found the entire show almost totally unwatchable. Is it just me?
Alex?
I find all the award shows to be unwatchable, so I'm probably the wrong person to do it. I'm like, I just find them all to be very, yeah. Anyway, so the what was it specifically for you that was unwatchable?
Oh my gosh, so many things. Now I'm comparing this against the Grammys, which is one of my favorite presentation shows, because the Grammys actually have artists sing and perform. They also did that at the Billboard thing, but the whole thing seemed like one long commercial and product placement orgy. There was just so many times that you go, oh, they're selling stuff again. Oh, they're selling stuff again. I actually have to admit, my wife and I watched that and the pre-show on another channel, And we enjoyed the pre-show about 5 times more than the actual production. We enjoyed them just talking to the people. It's one of those extreme fashion things where people spend a lot of money on looking perfect on the red carpet. And for people who are interested in how the fashion designers of the world are kind of trends and things like that, that was lovely. I found that real interesting. It was interesting hearing from the people themselves who are the artists in this thing. And I met a lot of people. I heard the names of a lot of people I didn't know anything about because there's just areas of music that I don't explore very much. All of that I thought was a positive. We got to the show and it just all fell apart for me. I literally could not sustain any interest in it because they just kept trying to shove stuff at me. And I thought I thought everything about it did. Now, it just may be me. This may just not be resonant for me, but it didn't work for me.
Alex?
And I think the challenge is that the Grammys have a much larger budget than the Billboard Music Awards, and so they have to find how they're going to pay for it as in a harder way than the Grammys. I think that's their challenge.
Right, with all those product placements. Mitchell?
Yeah, Bill, if you want to reach a new low, watch any of the People Choice Awards. That'll set a new paradigm for you.
Okay.
Next question.
Albie Lopez in San Antonio, Texas says, Alex, how is the Reality Scan app? Any new objects that you have been testing?
Alex?
I've been in production for the last little bit of time, and so I haven't had time to do much more with it just yet. But what I will say is that it is it's great for what it is. It's a beta. I know this will sound crazy, but it has a limit of 200 photos, which is for me limiting. I find that, when there's some complex objects that I'm trying to capture that I know that I would prefer to have 400 or 500 photos, and I can't do that with what's here. So I find that, but the resolution, the quality. Did I show the bolt? I think I might have rotated around the bolt that I took pictures of. Let me see if I can find it really quickly. But it is I shot. There's outside of our office. There was a bolt that I took a picture of. I took a bunch of pictures of. In fact, I took 200 photos of. Let me see if I can. I'll show this to you here. Let me just. See here. So let me cut to this. No, it doesn't look. There we go. So this is a 3D model of a bolt. Now I just cut it off as that square. But what you'll see is that it is a. I don't know if you can see it here, but that's all of that's 3D geometry all the way down to the rust. You can see that's there. So I was pretty impressed. If we get pretty close here, you can see that that's all geometry, that's there.
And you said that was just outside the office?
It was just outside my office, just in the wall. And I just, it was on a post. And I was like, oh, I'll take a picture of that. I'm sure that to the other people in the office, it looked pretty strange. But, the kind of things that I look at when I'm looking at something like this, and you can, I'm Alex Lindsay on Sketchfab. Yeah, I think you can even download this model if you want. But just all these little details here that are there, all the geometry here of this stuff coming out, everything has been captured effectively, inside that system. And so I was pretty impressed.
Noah?
That's just this, I'm assuming LiDAR on your phone, Alex, is that correct?
It's a mixture of LiDAR. So what it does is it has it's a mixture of using the LiDAR to know where the camera is very quickly and to be able to gather that data. And then it uses, photogrammetry it uses photogrammetry then to get the fine details. So LiDAR itself LiDAR on the phone is not high enough resolution to actually get that kind of geometry out of it. It needs the photographs, because with photographs, you're limited to the number of pixels in the image. And so what I did in this case, and sorry, I don't have a little bit of a cough. I got a drink here for a second, sorry.
That's okay.
So if iPhone goes up to the 48 megapixel rumor,
we'll get much better photogrammetry. Yeah, no, absolutely. And so, what happened here with this is that this is a result of many photos. So 200 photos, and the reason is I have larger ones that are further out that are coverage, But then I have ones that are just this little bit and just this little bit. I got as close as I could to the object as possible. And so that's what makes it work, is that I have larger ones that capture the whole piece, but then I'm going around and grabbing all the details. Now there's a Millennium Falcon in our office that's pretty high res, and we're going to shoot it in the next little bit for using this and some other photogrammetry tools in our stage to see how much detail we can get out of it. But I have a guess that I'm not going to be able to get as much detail as I need, because I'm only going to get 200 photos, and there's a lot of detail in that Millennium Falcon. And so I think that is, but that's where we're going to kind of test the geometry.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, I'll try to read this as best I can. He says, Deep Purple famously penned, quote, with a few red recording lights and a few old beds in a hotel room, we made a place to sweat, make our music. How have you made productions happen in unorthodox settings?
Mitchell.
I have a voiceover business, and sometimes a client wants something when I'm on vacation or away from my studio. And I've found it in hotel rooms. Two places work well: the closet with clothes in it. The other one is you can build a little bit of a cave with all the cushions and pillows and blankets that are in the rooms to get it deadened. It's always about deadening. And I usually like to use a 413 Sennheiser when I'm traveling to get voiceover work.
Cars are also a good one. Alex?
I'm always amazed that every day Douglas comes up with questions, these insightful questions, everything. I'm like, how does he do that? Anyway, so from a perspective of putting this together, I'm always reminded of a behind the scenes of Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe with an SM58 undercovers recording the voiceover for a show. And you just realize it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. And so I've definitely done that a couple times. I've also been, in hotel rooms or at houses where I suddenly had to do a voiceover, and I'm using something like this mic that is very sensitive. And I end up to Mitchell's point, build like a little tent all around it to try to get rid of the reflection so I can deliver something relatively quickly.
And Bill?
I've mentioned this shot before, but I had to do once a recording in a factory. The factory was so loud that you literally couldn't go on the premises without OSHA-approved headphones, and we had to do a live talking thing. And so it was a week of stress trying to figure out a process, and I ended up having to use a head-worn mic at the corner of the person's mouth and hand signals to tell them, when I do this, you ask your question. When I hold up two fingers, you ask your question. And I had to coordinate with visual signals because you literally could not hear any conversation happening at the panel where they were making the decisions. And you just have to do what you have to do. The rule for video for me has always been, it doesn't have to be real. It just has to look real. And so whatever you walk into in the situation, if you can't make it happen in the real time, you have to figure out ways to make it seem like it's happening.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana says, for flatter cables in HDMI, have you found any that stand well that are flat at 15 to 25 feet?
Jason?
Over the years, yes, I have, but it seems to be extremely hit or miss. If you're going to go any longer than 10 feet for any sort of longevity, go with fiber or something active. It's really impossible. You can't just say, well, it's a this, so it will that. It just doesn't work that way.
And Mitchell?
Yeah, if it's short, it's okay, but that kind of length, flat just doesn't work. I have that problem with Ethernet and with HDMI. I'd like the round ones and preferably braided.
Next question.
Next question comes from Ernest Lloyd in Bastrop, Louisiana. Does anyone have an opinion on the Logitech Rally Plus system? He's got a link there.
Alex?
I think it's Ernest Floyd. Hi, Ernest. I think that's really good. We've seen it in a couple of rooms that we've worked in. It's really good for what it is. So it being able to have that PTZ camera, being able to zoom into different people, audio reproduction is relatively good. It's still, I just will say that, conferencing when you're trying to think about a hybrid kind of meeting, I still will always say that it's better to just put everybody in their own office and have them be head and shoulder. When you get used to this and then you go into, as someone who's now jumping into conference rooms all the time, now that some people are back to work, I just find it to be a bummer I'd just rather them all come in from their office than get into a conference room. So that's all.
Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, how can you avoid being out of sight, out of mind when working remotely? I'm thinking of a short review process, what's going well and what isn't, and where are we going? At least weekly with your immediate manager would be very useful.
Alex.
Yeah, the main thing is being responsive. So there is a certain responsibility of being, when you're out of office, it's at least 9 to 5, you want to respond in minutes. Like you just really want to know that you don't really get to settle down as much. And that's the reality of working off. If you spend a couple hours not responding to someone when you're not in the office, people assume you're not working. So you have to, so you need to be able to be very responsive in that pipeline. And maybe it's a certain kind, like, oh, if you text me, I'm going to definitely respond back or whatever. But the main thing is you do have to be more responsive, letting people know where you're at. Not badgering people, but definitely letting people know, hey, we're having this, or this is what we're working on, or this is sometimes you might want to think about at the end of the day or the end of the week, kind of doing overviews of what you've been getting done, what the challenges are, what you're working on. Those kinds of things help you. And then, of course, just being in lots of meetings. So usually when you're working from home, for most companies, it means that you're in, anywhere from 2 to 6 hours a day of meetings. So that's the other thing to think about.
Bill?
I've had to change one of the things that I do, and I've now come to separate people that I work with, clients usually, but it could be anybody that I'm working with, into 2 categories. And this is, it's people who can visualize a project in process and those who cannot. And I say that because of this factor. In the old days, we were having a lot of meetings and we were keeping up, and they knew that I was making advancements because I was describing that. Now, with less of that, because I'm generally virtual and I don't like doing any more meetings than I have to virtually, particularly if I'm trying to organize something and get it incrementally to improve, I try to figure out who are my helpers inside the organization who have the ability not to over-manage projects. And what I'm saying by that is that if you say to somebody in the beginning of a meeting, the color is not right on this, and you show them the work, and then they come back the next day and go, the colors are all wrong. I consider those one of those sets of people who just cannot project and keep in their mind what we're focused on at this time. And I've had that happen over and over and over again. Now, you will identify people who, once you say, we are not, the color is not right on this, will not give you notes on color persistently. They kind of understand the production process, and they know we're working on typography here. We're not working on color, unless the type has color. And they will keep your incremental things in the right category. I love those people, and I try to ping them with new versions as much as is reasonable, not to abuse their time, because I want an advocate who's saying, oh yeah, you haven't talked to Bill, but I've talked to Bill and things coming along great. I've seen 6 versions and it's all making progress. And I try to find people inside the corporation to act as my advocate so I can keep those other folks who are very valuable, because sometimes they're stakeholders and they think at a bigger level, but they just impede my progress if they're constantly not understanding how this is evolving. More work that I turn in has to nowadays be more finished, because I run into those stakeholders who just can't conceive that this is only 80% of the way there. And they're going to waste all my time working on the last 20% that we couldn't do until we got all the copyright and all the decisions made to get into that final phase. It's just how it seems to be going on creative work for me these days.
Next question.
Next question. Joaquin Mattis in Imperial Valley, California is up next. He says, a bit of a weird one. How can I deal with a client that wants to bring in another provider to shadow my productions for the client? Not worried about the provider coming close to replicating my productions. Just want to avoid this awkward situation.
Go ahead, Noah, real quick.
I would ask, what's the true reason? Is it price? Is it because there's scalability, right? They're trying to do more than what you could handle as an individual. But I would also encourage you to build up your client base so that if that one client goes away, you're still safe as far as a business goes. I know there's been outsourcing for years, to other countries, and people who've been training other people to replace them and stuff. But the reality is you just have to have an honest conversation with that client and with yourself of where you are at and where they're at with this decision.
Mitchell?
A good advice from Noah there. Nothing good's going to come out of that relationship.
And Jason?
Well, first things first, say no. Just straight up say no. But my second and immediate reaction is I am shocked beyond belief that your insurance carrier would permit this. And if you don't know, they probably won't.
Okay, well, that wraps a great first hour. And now we're going to move into our second hour where we're going to discuss company culture. The idea just coming out of just even situations like this, and where company culture at the end of the day is essentially the behavior and the values that a company has. And while I know that our audience varies from freelancers and or startup or small production teams, marketing teams, all the way up to folks who work in government, but looking at how things have been going with the Great Resignation, at some point in time, you are going to work on a team, and whether that be you individually, but then whether that be you as a manager, your responsibility for setting the tone. We've heard in a lot of different ways when Alex may say, or when we talk about craft services and the value add that is on set or to a team of just having quality food and just not pizza, like those elements set the tone for how people will work together. And we look at, and company culture doesn't have to be this big pie in the sky. We look at companies like Apple and their innovation. So they're known for being innovative. They're known for pushing the boundaries, but they're also known for just really creating great products that their customers want to use. And what are some of the ways that we collectively, even the office hours culture, the culture of asking questions, the culture of being curious, that's what draws talent. That's what draws ideas. We had OH Space and all the spinoffs that have come from this. So this will be an opportunity for us to continue to dive in, definitely talking about the ways and the areas where company culture, cause you to maybe exit, and how you can take those learnings. Like a great example, years ago now, I worked in government. I was part of the interactive team. I was actually the first hire for them, now trying to do a lot of the work in-house. And that was exciting. We had our internal team, but then there was also an agency that got to do all the cool stuff. Even though we came up with some of the ideas in-house, they got a chance to execute. Completely understandable. That's where you have vendors, because internally you don't necessarily have the capacity for those things. But I remember sitting in a one-on-one session with one of the directors, and where the comment was made that, you should be lucky that you're here because that wasn't it. That was a whole other conversation. It was the idea that people don't necessarily get promoted, or it takes a long time for people to get promoted, or people stay in their spot for a really long time. So if I wanted to move up and become the web director, the culture there wasn't necessarily that. I would have had to leave and go elsewhere if I wanted the growth. And ultimately I did. I left and went out to do other things. But just the importance of knowing what the culture is where you work, and or what you're cultivating if you want to keep really good talent. And we'll continue the conversation. Alex.
Yeah, and I obviously I've had companies in slightly different sizes, and worked at companies of variety of different sizes. I mean, I think that one of the things that that's important in company culture is that people just want to know they're making a difference. They want to know that they're making a difference, and people will do a lot if they feel like they're growing, they're being taken care of, and they're making a difference, and they're making an impact. Those are things that go a long way. That's been my experience. And when they don't feel like they're useful, when they don't feel like they're being taken care of, and and they don't feel like they're growing, they don't stay very long. And so, or they don't. The worst part is that a lot of them will stay but not be useful. And so that there's a great saying that I think about often is, there was a CFO goes to a CEO and says, "What if we train all these people and then they leave?" And the CEO says, "What if we don't and they stay?"
Right.
So you have to be constantly investing. One of the things that I know inside of Pixelcore, I was not very connected to trying to stifle people's ability to leave. Now, we wanted it to be structured, when they leave, but we always looked at, we can't compete with many of our clients as far as how much they pay and everything else. And so we would rather be seen literally as a stepping point for many of our employees into the industry as opposed to trying to hang on to it. Now, sometimes we'd be a little prickly if they, we're going to leave unannounced, when we have projects going on. But overall, what we wanted to do is make sure that they were successful. And we were always just like, well, we just, if we worry about people being successful inside the company and wherever they end up, and we have lots of people that work now in many parts of these companies because of working with us, and meeting them and meeting their future employers in that area. And so I think that being kind of open to that, I think helped a lot. I was not, I don't think that I learned over time to be much softer than I used to be. I was a pretty hardened, production person for a long time. And I think that there was definitely a learning to really look for how to try to take care of people. In production, you can't always take care of people the way that they need to be. It's especially live production. You're just trying to do the best you can sometimes, but trying to stay ahead of it. And trying to make that work. But also, being in communication. One thing that we do a lot of we have this thing called RFIs, room for improvement. And a lot of times we're encouraging people to send us those, to fill those things out not all projects do that, but not all our projects do that, but a lot of them do. And definitely within Pixelcore, it was 100%, we would be asking for those things. It created an environment for people to constantly looking how to make it better. And that was something that it's hard because you have people complaining about everything. So it's hard. You have to build a thick skin that people are complaining about everything. But you want that. You want them to be able to express that. And then you want to try to find ways to make it better. You don't always make everything better, but you try to make the same mistakes as few times as possible. And I think but it also created a very exacting culture. People wanted it to be just so, and we made that okay, to be just so. We want it to be, we really want it to be great. Not just that we want to survive each project. And I think that also helped us a lot, moving forward.
Yeah, and just going to the comments, Sarah Doyle says, I've heard it called the Great Reshuffle from the recruiting space now, a reevaluation of values. Really good point there. And then John also says company culture is a result of behavior. Strong culture comes when employees experience autonomy, mastery, purpose, and challenge. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's really great. I think there's one little asterisk to the thing we're talking about too with company culture, and that is just human behavior and outliers, right? So there will always be a percentage of people that are anarchist or rebels or whatever description you want to describe that as, and maybe that's not caught right away, but yeah, that will happen. That there'll be some sort of anti-cultural thing going on, but it is ultimately up to the leadership of a company to try to spearhead that and shape that. And you're talking to a few leaders on this panel, which is awesome, and people who've built their own company cultures and designs, and that's something that I'm growing into myself, so I'm super excited about today. But the team also needs to follow that leadership, and so if we're not uniformly aligned in that view, that you're not a cultural fit in that company, and that's not always going to work out. One of the things in my personal background, I was on Hollywood sets, so I was a PA and then an assistant director, and there was kind of a mindset split between two different leadership styles, I guess you can call it. It was like the bulldog AD, right, who like yelled at people and tried to make everybody kneel to their will, right? And then there was the collaborative type of AD that like brought people together and got everybody on the same team. And so I quickly realized I wanted to be more of the second one that brought everybody together. And so that's how my management style works. And I quickly moved away from working from people from that first group, just because I wasn't a fit in that culture, and I don't want to shepherd that culture, so to speak. So, and that's kind of what I do now in my business. And the reality too is you're not going to be a fit in every culture, and not every employee is going to be a fit in every culture as well. So that's just part of it. And I think we should learn to accept that and just be okay with like not everybody's going to fit, and that's okay.
Good points. Alex?
I also think that there's a place to try to find where employees fit. So a lot of times they get people's responsibilities get mismatched with their internal compass. Anyway, I think I've talked about this once before, but I had an employee that it's very clumsy. It's in a shop that becomes expensive, and finally, I just needed them to not touch the gear. But I was afraid that I didn't know they had been unemployed for a while, and I was afraid that they wouldn't get employed again if I let them go. Because it was just like it didn't work to have them there, and so I said, just go over here and build 3D models in SketchUp of these objects. Just one at a time. I just needed you to sit in this office and do something. And it was mostly me just trying to figure out what to do with them while I figure out how to do whatever I'm going to do. Turned out they were like a rain person about building stuff in SketchUp, and started producing hundreds of models and became something that changed the way we did everything. And I very quickly realized that I had just mismatched the skill set to the operation. And so a lot of times what I'm trying to look for is who is good at what, and what makes them excited about what they're doing. And I try to match those things together. I don't always do it. Some people are so good at nugging through things. It's hard to know what they're good at and what they're passionate about, because they're just pushing. But with other people, you can really turn them on and off by getting them into the right space. And so I try to pay attention to that. The other thing is you want a heterogeneous mix of people. So you want people who are really paying attention to the details, people who are very calm and just trying to get things done, mixed with people who are, oftentimes, very high energy, trying to just do whatever needs to get done to get it done. If you have all of one, if all of people just paying attention to the details, nothing moves forward. And if everybody's crazy, then nothing gets done, everything just blows up everywhere. So you want, generally, in my opinion, you want about 5 to 10 people that are just trying to get things done for every one person that's breaking all the rules and going down those paths to maintain both energy and stability within the system.
I think you make a really good point there too, of just the responsibility of leadership, whether that be the CEO, as Noah said, a lot of us own companies, and or those that are in director positions, where so often interns, you look at the molding of interns more, or people who are entry level and trying to find their skills and where they fit in. But that's something, especially if you're looking for longevity for your company and or for your team, that you're constantly checking in, you're constantly assessing who fits where, because people change. Like at the end of the day, your team is made up of people and they evolve. So that just being a helpful way to just find out where people fit. And yes, if it's time for them to move on, that's another story, but you've put in the effort to make sure that you've invested in them people-wise. Tom?
When I was still in the workforce, I worked for an outfit that had 14,000 employees. I was the enterprise security manager of IT. If I would conduct a meeting, often it would include a number of departments. And if I saw a lot of new faces, I would start the meeting talking about RACI. Which category do you fall in? Are you responsible? Do you own this work? Is the decision or objective yours? If you are accountable, you own the work. You must sign off and approve when the decision, or the objective is completed. But then we also have those C people, the consulted people. We want your input. We want to hear what you have to say before the work is completed or accepted. And then the I people. If you're informed, that means that you definitely are notified of the progress on a particular project, but you don't need to be consulted, and it's not up for a vote.
That's good. And going back to the comments, Mickey made a comment, as a worker, I require something of value in exchange for my time. That is usually monetary, but I also find learning and growth highly valuable. And JJ says it's only if you allow people to fit into 2 categories of that RACI model. All right. Well, it looks like it's time to get into the questions. Bill?
All righty. Our first one comes from Tlaloc Miguel Lopez Waterman in Salisbury, Maryland. He says, when you are the owner, worker, accountant, and all things in your one-person company, how do you keep from yelling at those under you? And he has a winking emoji but I think there's some serious pieces to this. Obviously you don't want to yell at yourself. You particularly, you can talk to yourself, but try not to answer too much and try not to develop multiple people inside your head answering to each other. That's not a good thing. Other than that, though, I want to go back to a thing that I heard once. I was watching an interview with golf lesson Jack Nicklaus. And here's what happened on maybe the third hole. He hit a horrible shot. And so at the end of the tournament, they were interviewing him. And the interviewer said, so tell me, what went wrong on 3? And Nicklaus looked at him with the blankest look I had ever seen in my life. I mean, just like, huh? And later on, when they were talking, somebody was analyzing that golf tournament. They said, one of the things that Nicklaus does is that when he makes a mistake, he does not get crazy about it, because he believes that in your brain, the human brain is always looking for stimulation. And it doesn't really make any difference between negative stimulation and positive stimulation. If you do something wrong and you get really excited about the fact that you did something wrong, your brain, if it needs a little stimulation, will go back to doing it wrong again. This was his theory. And so if you just reinforce for yourself the things that go right and try to tamp down going crazy at mistakes, you will make fewer mistakes. Now, I don't know if there's a direct relationship to that, but it was his theory, Nicklaus's theory, and he had a pretty decent golf career, one of the greatest of all times. And so I've tried to remember that. I want to notice things that go wrong. I want to take action about them. I want to make them important, but I don't want to scream and shout about them, because all I'm doing is building pathways in my brain that attach excitement to failure. Not good.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of leadership that I've worked with, it's a known thing that they just kind of have. We used to joke that they have Ted Turner has like a plate in the back of his head that is the past, and that's like a minute ago. Like he doesn't really he gets stuff brought to him, and he just yes, no, no more than 6 lines. And someone asked him one time, what happens if you make a wrong decision? He goes, well, I'll make another one tomorrow. And it's just, and he just kind of plows through it. And the people who can make decisions quickly are people who understand that they can adjust later. That this decision is not going to be the only thing that ever matters. That you're going to be able to, you'll just keep on negotiating with the process. And I think that is the, being able to just move forward and not look back and take some lessons, but try not to learn too much from them. You want to learn from your mistakes, but I think sometimes people overlearn and decide I'm never doing that again. And that's never is a big word.
Jason?
To Bill's story, there's a huge kind of grounding to the golf thing in psychology. It is absolutely true that if you have a toddler and the toddler cannot get your attention doing, Mom, I did this well, I guarantee they're going to do something bad to get your attention otherwise. We all have this 3-year-old, in our mind, and the difference is what you do about it. I think it was the Dalai Lama that said, if there's something you can do about a situation, don't worry about it. And if there's nothing you can do about a situation, don't worry about it. You need to understand the difference between accountability and making ripples that end up kind of becoming their own problems.
Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, the split personality thing is a real thing. It feels like sometimes where you are mad at your accounting self or your business development self or what have you. But to me, I think that the core of the question, from what I'm getting out of it, is growing in how you plan and prioritize, right? And so that's something I'm always working at and growing at. But planning time, right? You only have so many hours in a day. And so you need to be, as the sole person of your company, prioritizing well and organizing that and saying, this needs to go to the top. I need to do those business development deals before I spend time tinkering on my tools or what have you. Because certain things are going to have to take priority, and that's part of what we do as business owners. I don't know necessarily if that relates to company culture, but it is kind of more of a business thing. And like I said, that's something I'm growing in and working on myself.
The way I look at it is and this is kind of you're describing as almost like a solopreneur, like you have to do everything and you're responsible for everything. And that's where you look for opportunities, because that yelling at people under you could possibly be some of that is the stress and the overwhelm as the solopreneur that comes into place. And the way I look at it is, well, one, at the end of the day, if you want to grow and scale, that means that you need people. And there's only so much that you can do in the hours in the day. So as Noah had shared, looking for ways, is there someone who can take on some of those admin responsibilities that might cause you to pull your hair out a little bit? What kind of processes that can you put in place to help mitigate errors or the things that might cause you to have to yell or cause you to have issues with how people are doing things? One of the things that I found is when instructions, like giving clear communication, clear instructions to people, that when there's a lapse in that typically is where issues will arise and cause, again, errors and problems. And then overall, it is finding people that make sense, that they understand the speed that you're working at. And that goes back to the idea of company culture, therefore ultimately helping you to take the burden or take the load off of you so that you won't have to get to that place. And I'll say lastly, that sometimes you just need to, you see something, there are some emails I'm like, not today. I will not answer that today because I know it will not be good for either person. Bill?
Well, and Liberty, to your initial point you made, when do we yell normally? We typically yell when we're out of control or something is out of control around us, right? The car is suddenly spinning and you go, ah, and if you're in control, I have found that a certain level of bombastic thing can be good. I have seen leaders, and I remember this specifically from when I was playing in a junior band decades ago, and the guest conductor was in, and he started out by going, "Oh my God, you guys are also, nobody's paying attention." He just went on a little rant for a while. Then he turned over to one section and grinned. And the fact that we all understood that he was making a point, but with us, not at us, completely changed the dynamic of that. There are times when you have to elevate what you're saying, the way you're saying it, into being an important thing so everybody pays attention to it. But if you have that emotional intelligence to understand that you don't leave them in a state of, I'm feeling horrible, that I can't do my job and everything's a mess, and you have techniques or tricks like that conductor did to deflate all of that energy, you still make your point, but you still keep cohesion in the group that you're trying to lead. And I always remember that lesson in my life. You can't be out of control when you're yelling. If you're going to do something about, making this important to people, you have to have the skill to do that the right way.
Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer, Viera, Florida, says, with some returning to the office, what ways can we avoid proximity bias, preferential treatment for office workers over remote?
Alex.
So as a remote worker, one of the things that you can do is up your game when it comes to how you present yourself. So having a good camera, and it is something, you are saving money. You're not paying gas. You're oftentimes moved to a less expensive location. But look at this as an investment. You have to have good audio. You have to have good video. You have to look good. You cannot just come in on your web camera. Like, you should not do that. Like, that is undermining your authority inside of your company. If you're a leader, especially if you're some kind of manager, you need to up that game. So that as the employee is what you need to do. As the employer, really just get rid of the conference rooms. like they're worthless. Those conference rooms that you have there in the next generation. What I think that companies should be doing is giving people their own office space. Get rid of this abomination that was the open office. Everybody knew it was an abomination. Probably pretty close. It's cheaper. Like, that's all it was to save money. Now you have less employees coming to the same amount of space. You have space now. You're not packing them in. You can build them their little cubicles that are there. And I think that those should be largely soundproof cubicles. I think this is the future for a lot of these companies. And they have great video and audio, and lighting so that people can be in these conferences with each other in the building as well. Just think about the lost time in a large campus oftentimes it was 5, 10, 15 minutes of us getting from one place to go from one conference to another room, and so I think that, look at the companies should be looking at how they keep people, again, head and shoulder shots are also much less stressful for a lot of folks, they just get to, they don't have to worry about all the other stuff, even if they're in the office. And so I think that we need to think about just getting rid of conference rooms because, they're good for a handful of things. You can leave them there for a handful of things that people do, but really we should be looking at how we use these kind of virtual spaces to move forward.
And one of the ways too can also just with remote work is we use Slack a lot. And even some of the projects that we're pulled into, those teams are using Slack. And there are like being very intentional is a big part of it. So there are certain days where it's like Friday and they send out like their perks sent out. And that's a part of company culture, what kind of perks are there, but being intentional in how you do treat your remote workers. So that being putting some kind of plan in place just so that they are still connected. Yes, they can stay connected via email or Slacker, but finding some social ways as well. And practically, even if it as a manager, even if you have to set an appointment in your calendar that reminds you to check in on your remote workers, that could also be helpful. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says Shopify has moved to being remote first, but mentions, quote, in-person experiences, close quote, as a means to build trust and connection. Can that trusting, connected culture be built in an all virtual environment?
Go ahead, Alex.
I mean, I think that in a lot of ways, office hours is proof that it can. Like we have after hours, we have office hours, we have, it's a matter of consciously and intentionally doing something every day, all the time, and creating that space. Even though if you go to office hours and there isn't a lot of people talking at the moment, it doesn't mean once you start talking, people prick up and start to have a conversation, and being able to have that kind of constant connection. And then we are seeing things where a handful of people get together, like the rocket launch, like NAB, like some of those things, like what's coming up with NAM and Cinegear. We are doing projects that are blending those. We have people on the ground, we have people, virtually, and we're blending those groups together and having them work together. And I think that that's a proof that this can happen.
Go ahead, Bill.
I know they were widely derided, but remember that before the pandemic and before we moved to more virtual, there were tons of corporate culture building exercises that took place, moving the whole team out onto rope ladders in the woods or something like that, because this has been a part and parcel to building cohesive companies since the dawn of time, finding ways to get your employees to get out of their, I'm just coming to work for 8 hours and that's it, and I don't care about anything else. I want my paycheck and I'm going to do the minimum possible. So it's always been a piece. I can't see it not being leveraged into this virtual world where people find ways to continue to connect. Now, whether that's in person or as we did before with the office hours band, that was all virtual. And yet relationships that I made with some of my fellow folks in the band really did feel much more like those one-to-one personal relationships in the real world, even though we did it all virtually. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think it's starting to happen now with all of these little pods of people coming together in different forms. And it's a new kind of cultural thing. And I just think we have to encourage, set up for, make that possible, exactly like Alex has done with not only the main show here, but these extra things on the outside that allow people of like mind to get together and form closer bonds, even than we would have if we're just doing the panel work here.
Next question.
Next one comes from Craig McFarland in Boston here in the USA. Says, how do you help your team quickly understand a client company's culture, communications preferences, escalating issues, responding to email, book meetings, and so forth?
Alex?
We minimize the amount of people that are talking to a client, always. It is a handful of people that get to talk to the client, and they already have a long history in talking to clients. And then what we do is we have newer people shadowing those meetings. And so they're taking notes. They're copied on the emails. They're part of that conversation, but they don't reply. They don't talk, and they absorb how that works. But we don't put anybody new, or we do everything we can to avoid anybody new having any direct interaction with the clients. So there's a handful of us that talk to clients, and we try to keep it to that handful. But we have other people supporting it so that when we need to do that, they've already been in lots of different client meetings, lots of meetings with that client, and they understand how we approach it and also how the client approaches it. Because sometimes we approach it in a more protected way than the way the client wants to do it. The client might be very easygoing and want to talk about lots of things, and we tend to be a little bit more protected about what we talk about. So I think that it's important to indoctrinate people into a client's process very slowly, and not push them into making decisions and having interactions with the client. They can misstep very quickly, and that's the end of your contract.
Bill?
I also think it's important to understand the breadth of different cultures that client companies can exhibit. And two of the most important that I learned, we did work for many years with PetSmart, and they were a culture based around the human-pet interaction relationship. They would talk about how people love their pets, and they would talk in those kind of terms. For another period of time, and I won't name the company itself, but we got asked to come in and pitch, and we did 3 or 4 spots and some work for a company who was a meat packing plant. And their culture was utterly different. These are people who stand on a line and process meat all day long, and some people who do nothing but kill cows all day long. I'm not going to give you a value judgment. It would be really easy to say, one was much better than the other. They are both serving the needs of their market. It was not a good fit for me. I found myself drawn to one side, and I struggled with the other side because every piece of communication they wanted to do acknowledged who their customers were, the level of extreme that they would go to. They asked me to do one where we're knocking over an outhouse with somebody in it and stuff like that because it would be fun. And for that audience, it is that they understood their employee base and worked toward that employee base. And so if I had just brought in the same exact attitude toward both, I would probably have been a better vendor for more different kinds of companies. But I do think I would have struggled constantly going back and forth and keeping a line for myself about what I consider when I should speak up about the script, when I should speak up about the examples, because one resonated with me and I intuitively understood the culture of that. And the other one, it was hard for me to look at the culture and grok it individually.
Last year, one of the client services people that we brought on, she actually brought the idea of using Notion, which is a tool. A lot of companies use it from a brand, putting their brand guides and whatnot there, but you can actually it's really robust and can build it out so that what we've done is our onboarding process and how to communicate with a client. We have templates, there's just so much in there. So having a practical tool like that, so that when you do onboard someone who is new, that they're able to go in and follow some sort of onboarding regimen with that. And then 2 is training, because it says here in the question of how do you get your team to understand? So whether those be, once a month type of workshops or something where you'll speak to something in your process specifically, or where you find that there's an area that could use some strengthening, going over that. But those are 2 ways that we found it effective. And to just plus one on what Alex said before about just limiting who is actually facing, who's client facing. And when you bring someone else new, that there's a period of time, again, that word training to just help in that process. Next question.
Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany says, culture eats strategy for breakfast, says Peter Drucker. What are your recipes to avoid that phenomenon? It can't be better food.
Jason.
I would amend to that culture eats half-baked, not justified strategy for breakfast. Institutional memory is basically the sum total of a staff's understanding and knowledge, and collectively how they apply that knowledge to the jobs that they do. If you decide you're going to hairpin turn as being up on high in management, you're gonna get eaten for breakfast, because it's seen as not something that they are brought into, that they are a part of, and that it will absolutely be resisted. If you make it a if you make it something that everybody has a part in, and you figure out how to make something that is in at least the company's best interest, but also the people who are the company's best interest, I think you'd have a much better outcome.
Go ahead, Noah.
I think this quote from Peter basically states that company culture can be stronger than a strategy. And I think you should embrace that. I think company culture is a key thing. And when you have everybody on the same team and working towards the same goals, you're going to be more effective at what you're doing. And then I got this wrong early on in my career and what I was doing. And I realized that over time, this like rule mindset of like making people follow a certain set of guidelines and strategy was less vital compared to having intelligent based decisions and everybody understanding general concepts of why we do things a certain way.
Alex?
Yeah, I'll argue that the company culture is the strategy. That you really, the strategy is you develop people that are going to make good decisions on the fly. They have enough autonomy to make those decisions. They're not thrown under the bus every time they make a mistake. They're just simply like, okay, let's figure this out. Let's move to the next thing. One of the things that we do, you'll find a lot around us, is that a lot of us blame ourselves for things when they don't go wrong. I didn't do this. I didn't tell person this. I didn't do, and that comes from leadership. And what it ends up is that when something goes wrong, there's not a lot of finger pointing out. It's all in, and that usually means you're creating a culture that's safe for people to communicate. When they're apologizing for things and they say, "Oh, I could have done this. I could have done that," then we try to do that as best we can.
Bill?
I would just add the word adaptable in front of that, because I have seen companies who are hidebound in their culture and they do not react to market changes and global changes very well because they want to keep doing things the same way they have. I've heard this is the way we do it. I've also brushed up against and never stuck, thankfully, with some of those high energy sales cultures where it's just make the numbers. I don't care what you have to say. I don't care what you have to do. Just make the numbers. And that kind of toxic culture can succeed in the short run, but eventually every time I've seen somebody do that, the amount of energy and disassociation it required to run that kind of culture just peters out over the course of the long run. People have to have something below just that really does resonate with them emotionally to sustain cultures over long periods of time. And if the management isn't watching out for the fact that the market is shifting away from what our culture used to succeed at, and we're going to adapt our culture a little bit to this new thing, that's just as dangerous as all the others because the market shifts.
Next question.
Scott Goff in Jackson, Tennessee has this one. How do you change the culture of a heavily siloed company to be more open?
Alex?
A lot of times we've seen this done by cross-pollination of the team. So you bring some of the leadership of the teams together to work on specific projects. Hey, this is something that's important. So they get to know each other, and because a lot of times they don't know each other, and you want to be able to figure out ways to communicate across those systems, but it usually isn't something you do all at one time. It's something that you bring a couple people from each one of these things. Usually they're the ones that think a little outside the box, get them working on a project together, and then they start bringing people in from their teams. And then we start to see some of those walls get a little softer.
Bill?
Yeah, I saw that a lot as the bigger and bigger companies that I worked with and for. Silos are very difficult to break down because usually you have strong leadership and they are competitive. And so whether it's marketing against operations or something like that, that competitive spirit can get into the process of trying to poach high performers from one silo into another and the rest of that. It must come from an executive level. And I think it has something to do with what Alex is saying. You have to realign the pieces on the board such that some of those natural alliances get broken up. And cross-silo communication, I think, is probably one of the most important corporate things for long-term, because as you get into these things where only we and our team know what's going on, and we're just always trying to be the most productive, the most profitable, the most everything else, and I will do whatever I can, including realigning assets and the best people and everything else into my silo. That's bad mojo.
Go ahead, Noah.
This is a tough broad stroke situation to cover, but I think generally speaking, people become more stubborn as they age, right? The older you get, the more fixed you are in your ways and the things you do and things you want to see. And people tend to not change their mind. They just tend to die off, for lack of a better way of saying it. And I think we just have to keep in mind that experience is transitory, right? In the sense of what's relevant today isn't necessarily relevant 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. Times are changing, variables are changing. But the only variable you can really fully control is you and how you respond to that. And so take the first steps yourself and find ways to adapt and move forward.
There was a company that I worked at where it was we had each editorial team, web, video, and sales, and they actually brought someone in, somewhat of a mediator, I'll say, to help us just collectively share what's happening in the company, and in the effort of us to be able to work well together. However, if I don't know, Scott, where you are in the chain, if you're in management, but what we found is, as much as it enabled us to have an opportunity to vent and to come up with ideas, so the groundwork being done between the departments. However, if there's someone in leadership who's not also involved in that, and who's also like, they brought the person in, however, systems didn't change and how we communicated didn't change. So it caused it to be futile. So I would just say that it's really important that everyone be on board. And especially when if you're the leader, that the need for change and to implement those changes. Next question.
Stefan Fischer, Würzburg, Germany, comes up next, and he asks, does anyone use thinking models like the integral AQAL model by Ken Wilber or any other ones?
Alex?
So I've seen a lot of these in a lot of big companies, and they have lots of meetings about them. And I find that, especially when they build really complex ones, it's good for the consultants. You know, they come up with, they have great presentations, and they talk about these things, and people will have a language to them. I don't know if it makes any difference on a day-to-day basis, to be honest, for these like complex thinking models. I think that there are a handful of things that are important. I think that understanding first things first is important. You know, like understanding, like prioritize, prioritize, basic culture models. But I think that a lot of the times you end up with managers that have these complex relationships with people that just aren't that complex. You know, it's that they want to feel valued. They want to feel like what they're doing makes a difference. They want to feel, and they need some guidance in those areas. But I think a lot of them are much more basic. And so you get these complex models that everyone's trying to fit everybody into, and they spend more time looking at the model than looking at the people. And so it's really, and I'll keep on saying, with everything, for me, my gravity of production of everything that I do is action equals possibility is greater than circumstance. Everything to me is that equation. When I'm talking to anybody, people will move when the possibility of what they could get is bigger than the circumstance that they see in front of them. And it just doesn't have to be any more complicated than that most of the time. So
keep it simple.
Yeah.
Bill?
The word that I struggled most with through the course of my time in corporate C-suites was metrics. And it was interesting to see different leaders and how they approach metrics. To me, these things are another form of metrics, which is comforting to people who think in terms of that. We're going to measure this thing. Well, how do you measure it? Well, you decide a metric, and then you decide whether you're above or below that, and you can make charts out of it, and you can put it into Excel spreadsheets, and you can measure whether we're 2 points or 2 basis points lower than we were last month with it. But it's not the real look at how the human organization is functioning. It's an abstraction. And as of that, the companies that I've seen most driven by that kind of spreadsheet metric thinking have been the most tenuous. They've had rockier times. I will also, though, admit that companies that do not track metrics never seem to go anywhere serious. So it's this weird thing in the middle where you have to pay attention to your numbers always. But if all you pay attention to your numbers, you're digging yourself over time a long hole, is what I've seen. So this is one of those things. It's like jazz. You have to know when to be ahead of the beat, when to be behind the beat, when to make it feel right for everybody in the organization. You cannot reduce it to just a set of codified data and have it work for every circumstance across everything with every team of people. Just I don't believe in my heart of hearts that works.
Next question.
Noah Sargent, Fullerton, California says, how are we shaping the office hours culture? Alex, what are you hoping the undertones of the culture should be like?
Go ahead, Alex.
Well, I think that, every culture is imperfect. so you're always working on it. I think that one of the things we established pretty quickly on was that we weren't going to get caught up in politics and, compare our religions. We're not going to swear. What that did is there's a couple of different things that was designed to generate. Number one is that it means that I can leave the speakers open. All of us can leave the speakers open listening to this and not A, get riled up, and B, feel like we're embarrassed that someone started, swearing when we're in a family environment or something like that. And so it created an initial, we're going to be a little above the normal day to day when we're having these kind of conversations and not get caught in the trough of what a lot of people get caught up in. And so I think that helped set a pace. It also kind of just pushed out a lot of people that can't do that. So the people I don't believe in that. Well, that's the intention, is to just have them not be here. So so if they didn't feel, and so it was, if they're not ready to be that way, it's open to everyone. But they have to choose to follow a couple things that we think make, raise the level of the conversation a little bit. I think that, we focus a lot on, sharing. And I think that, sharing what we know and understanding that investing in other people is generally more valuable than almost anything else. Like investing our ideas, for me to invest my knowledge in this group, or for anybody to invest their knowledge in this group. That's something that doesn't happen in a lot of, especially non-company cultures, but even in company cultures, people want to have the thing that they know and they hold their knowledge like a valuable thing, as opposed to that it is an opportunity to invest in other people and to allow it to grow to something bigger. And that the connection that we build by sharing that knowledge is deeper and more impactful to our success than holding on to it. And I think that is a complex, part of a culture that I don't see as deeply as we see here. The other thing is just having, some level of, there's definitely some guidance of things that are there, but there's a lot of things within this that has a fair bit of autonomy. There might be some input, from me or others, but a lot of folks, whether it's the remotes or the even a lot of the editing systems and everything else that goes into 2.0 to, different coverage of things, what I try to do is make a decision about, can I help with that or not? And if it looks like it's got a bunch of people, I just try to stay out of the way. So it's, and provide support where we can, and then look at how we add those. So I don't know. I don't know if those are the kind of things that I think about a lot, related to building a culture within what we do, is to constantly be supporting each other and teaching each other how to get this stuff done, knowing that that's what's building the connection.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. He says, heard a new one to me. I was asked if I was a scrum master. I said, no, I don't play rugby. Is this focus on team building necessary with smaller teams, or is this just a failure of management style?
Go ahead, John.
Chris, you don't like rugby? I don't know if it's a failure. Scrum is part of the agile project development style, which is a small team of people that are on sprints doing short bursts of work iteratively. So it's just somebody probably read an article in a business magazine somewhere, and they try to deploy a agile project management system within your organization. It's my guess.
Alex?
Yeah, I think it breaks up sometimes. One of the things that people can get caught up in is thinking too much without actually doing. So so there's all this over planning and everything else. And a lot of times, it's funny, before the name Scrum, the way the Pixel Core team started 20 years ago was basically, let's go out and do stuff and fail, and then we'll come back and talk about what didn't work, and then we'll do it again, and then we'll fail, and then we'll keep on. So I guess that's what we were doing. And we were just and the key was go out and do it, and then come back with, and figure out. And so I have a tendency to do that. I like to go under high pressure. I've been doing that for a very long time. But I think that the problem you get into is what gets people in trouble is they'll sit there and plan forever. But the problem is the environment has changed, or there's things that you now know don't work, or all those other things. Like if you look at Makana has been little sprints of fixing things and adding new things, for the last, 5 or 6 years, so it's not something we planned. It's something like we react to. Oh, it'd be good if we had that, kind of thing. And it's a different process.
Bill?
Don't feel bad. You're gonna for the entirety of your business career, these terms will float through your reckoning. And I remember so many times that, what did he mean by Scrum? I don't understand it. It's exactly what you thought. I mean, I was thinking rugby, and it's entirely something else. I remember when Six Sigma became a huge thing in manufacturing around, and all of a sudden, somebody said to me, I'm a black belt. And I said, I don't care about your off time. He said, no, I'm a Six Sigma black belt. And I'm going, what does that even mean? And I had to go do a bunch of research. That came through. Other things come through. The latest business books of the month or of the decade or whatever will cause people to change their language for a while. And it's just a way of signaling that you're paying attention to the industry of management more than anything else. And if you want to do that, if your goal is to ascend to management in a larger organization, it is well worth your while to understand these initiatives as they roll through the marketplace. Sometimes it's in the US, sometimes it's global, but it's also you're starting to say, I don't want to do this. I want to just get into that huge pond of people who are all MBA type management consultant types, and that's a nice living if you want to do it. I just find that kind of boring.
Alex?
But don't worry, if you just wait a couple of years, there'll be a new consultant with a new book and a new thing, and then they'll call it something else. So the bottom line is that you just got to find ways that you can, fail often and fail small, and just keep figuring out what's next.
Next question.
Molly Eisen in Atlanta, Georgia says, what advice would you give someone who has been working for a great organization for almost 20 years and feels desperately ready to do something new and different, but struggles with the fear of upsetting loyalties and or stressing those left behind?
Jason?
Oh, Molly, nobody on this panel is going to say, just stay in those waters. Everything's going to be totally fine. Just eke out the rest of your career. No, of course, go for it. But, you would be a psychopath if you didn't have some sort of connection to this thing that you've grown with and that's grown around you. Of course, you have some feeling towards it. Leave yourself enough time and help those that will be taking your place feel okay with it.
I think technically that's a sociopath, not a psychopath.
Don't go there, Lindsay.
Noah.
Oh my gosh. I would say don't let temporary feelings steer your long-term success, right? So the fear of upsetting people, loyalties, and stressing people out, that's only temporary, right? And your career and your long-term goals in life are that long-term success that you're going to see. Going back to Alex just a few questions ago, he quoting him, action is equals possibilities that are greater than your circumstances, right? And the final thing is risk often creates better opportunities. So don't be afraid of risk.
Look at that application in real time. Alex?
I think I've talked a lot about this in the past, but most of the time I'm in some kind of tank track, which is I have 3 things generally revolving around me. Sometimes there's a couple more. Sometimes there's a couple in the front. This one's making the money that pays my bills, right? But there's always something I'm trying to get to, and then there's always one I'm trying to get rid of. I'm not interested in, but this used to be what was paying my bills. But then this moved into what is now paying my bills, and I'm trying to get rid of that other one because it's now dead weight as far as I'm concerned, or a smaller percentage, and I slowly wind it out. I don't cut it off. I just slowly just have it go somewhere else. And I just keep going. And so what you want to look at is where you can have it be that way. You don't have to have it all or nothing. You don't have to leave your job to go do something. You can be playing with something that you're passionate about and figuring out how you turn that into it while you still have the safety of what you're doing. Sometimes that can be inside of your job, that you're taking on some new things. Sometimes it's outside of your job. If it's inside of your job, that means that you'll continue to move forward somewhere. I think that people oftentimes also get caught up in where they are in the echelon of the company. And it's very much a corporate culture to think about what your title is. When people ask me what my title wants to be, I'm like, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. I don't care if you pay me to do the thing and I get to do the thing, then that's all I care about. And I think that people get caught up in that, and it basically gets you caught like you can't go down, you can't go to the side, you always have to go up. And I find that friends of mine that are in these big corporate cultures get very caught up in the definition of where they are, as opposed to generally when people are doing things that they're passionate about, they do pretty well in the company. And it doesn't look like they have some big title or whatever, but they're having a good time, and I think that's one of the big things in the great reshuffle that we've seen is that as people are realizing that they'd rather enjoy their life than constantly be trying to move up and trying to get to headquarters and trying to do all those other things. When they were at home for a little while, they realized, oh, this isn't that bad, and maybe I'd rather have a full life. So, I would definitely think about those things. The final thing I would say is that when you have a decision like, I just can't do this anymore, make a request before you decide you can't do it. So go to the person that you're working with in your company. If you're going to quit anyway, then, there's this thing about samurai. They say the samurai entered battle dead. They visualize their death. They visualize they're not going to, so they could free themselves to act, so they could act freely in battle. And a lot of times I think about entering, like if I have something that just has to get done or I'm going to leave, I just make the request that I need to make, within my organization, and they either get made or not, and then I make a decision about what I'm going to do next. But you don't leave without making those. There's been so many places where I've had both employees that worked for me that just left because they thought they would never be able to do something. I was like, that's silly. I would have totally just had you do that thing, if that's what you wanted to do. And the same thing, I've left places because I didn't think there was any upward mobility or sideward mobility of where I wanted to go. And when you talk to them later at a dinner or something, they're like, oh, that would have been really easy to put you there. So you just want to make sure that you make the request before you, to especially if you're in a great company, to just redefine your job before you do it. And this is a good time to do it because everyone's trying to hang on to everybody. So.
Yeah. And Alex, that's a great point, because I was saying that if you've been there for this long, for 20 years, one, congratulations. Two, they care. There should be some care and concern about your happiness as well. So whether that be you thinking through what you do want to do next and seeing if that's something that can be done there and making that request, like Alex said, and or your self-care, and that you need to make that transition, and you're concerned about who might be left behind. Well, that doesn't mean they can't call or just continue to maintain those relationships. Or if there's a need for training, some of those things that you can do beforehand, before leaving, because that also helps you to, part ways and go on to your adventure with good graces, because you never want to burn bridges. Because ultimately, hey, one day, if you want to come back, you've gained some more skills that could be of value to them. They also see how that you've cared for the company and the people. And that door is always open for you. Bill?
Also, you're framing it as leaving them behind. What about reframing it as you're opening up the opportunity for the next you? I mean, if you're leaving the position, that means that somebody else gets a chance to become what you have been in terms of value to the company. So your frame can be closing or it can be opening.
And Jason?
Above my mirror in my bathroom, I wrote a long time ago and see it every morning: live deliberately and die empty. I can't put it better than that. You have one life. Do what you need to do with it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to our producers for another great show. And of course, to our panel for your contribution and sharing your insights and information. And tomorrow we'll be talking with Dan from Bird Dog. So you want to make sure you get back with us. And for those that are looking for the rest of the schedule, head over to officehours.global. And now we're going to head into after hours. Thank you so much for tuning in.
People do stuff.
It's always great to have Liberty. I love Liberty hosting. I love being panelist.
Great job today, Liberty. Great job.
Thank you. Thanks for all the comments. Great stories too. I wasn't sure if we were still whispering because nobody whispered.
We're still whispering, especially for Mitchell.
Yeah, he's gone. Let's whisper a lot.